to enjoy it,
Okay.
because otherwise they'd be in trouble.
Yeah, they would
And
be.
anyway, I sent Glenn I sent him like a dozen handouts just
Yeah, I'm gonna put
because,
those. I'm gonna put
yeah,
them in the chat right now.
but I'm going to share some things, as I talk about them. But please feel free to share these with anybody. Um, my thinking is I don't own any of it. It's about the process that I've used over the years for myself and the process that I continue to use with all of my students about, man, how do you get to the place where you can think in music and then immediately have that come on your instrument? Because until you can think in music without looking at notes, without looking at, any kind of notation or any kind of chord changes or anything, until you can really think clearly in your mind about sound, what that sound is, and how to make it instantly and instantly in any key, then you really haven't gotten to a place where you can begin to express yourself. At least I felt that way about myself. Okay, I'm going to share. And I ended up putting all of these things into notation. Um, and you'll see what my notation is like. Um, when I was doing some clinics, a number of years ago, and they said, well, Kent, you're going to be working with a room of saxophone players. I showed up, there's like 50 saxophone players. I was like, holy smokes, I don't think I've ever seen this many saxophones before. And they're going to be from like 6th grade through 12th grade. I'm going, oh boy. And so I had to think of something that would be good for everybody, and but at the same time challenge everybody and something everybody could do. So I started coming into my ideas here. Um, and this was early in my computer days, so my graphics aren't great. But anyway, I found some graphics that were already made and I plopped them in there. Anyway, this is, I'm sure almost everybody here knows, um, a very nice circle of fourths if you go clockwise, or a circle of fifths if you go counterclockwise. My recommendation to all of my students is, okay, we're going to go like the clock. Um, and so I have all the flat keys, they're on this side, and all the sharp keys are on this side. And here's your natural. And it just goes around the clock: 1 flat, 2 flat, 3 flat, 4. And so my thinking is, we don't teach people to practice correctly. And boy, that's something that ruffles a lot of feathers probably. And people go, wait a minute, oh, I teach really well, I do this. Well, I'm sure we can all remember all the way back to the first time you learned a major scale. Whether it was B flat concert scale in band, or if you were taking saxophone or whatever, trumpet lessons, and it was in a lesson book, and it's one scale. And then a few weeks later, they give you another scale. Well, to me, that doesn't work. I would rather do this. At some point, usually in 5th or 6th grade, the chromatic scale is introduced as being, oh, it's all in half steps. It's a symmetrical scale. Everything's in half steps. And so once a student knows that and can play it even just in 1 octave, and I can actually do that, so I won't demonstrate it. Once you can play a chromatic scale, then what I like people to do is I give them this. And sometimes I do this. I've done this actually lately with a graduate saxophone player who is a classical saxophone player. And he kind of put like this idea of doing jazz on hold. And he came to me. And so this is a smart guy. He can really play the saxophone. I said, okay, start doing this. I said, and you're going to think it's crazy, but just do it. Just play whole notes around the circle. Whole note C, whole note F, whole note B flat. And I want you to think that that's what you're playing as you play it. So as I scroll down here, I give you some, descriptions and how these things are structured here and some other ways to think about it. So I like people to just play the cycle. Then, because they know what a half step is, you say, okay, 2 half steps are a whole step. So now I want you to go around the cycle and play in half notes and a whole note. And you can do this with anybody. And actually, it's a good way to warm up too. And you can do this on every instrument. You can do this in your jazz band rehearsal. You can do it in a sectional. You can do it in a lesson. You can do it with a whole concert band of people. Now, truth be told, I kind of stole this approach from, there was a band director a number of years ago in upstate New York. I forget what town he was from, but his name was Ed Lisk. He was from up around where Harold is living. I forget what town though. But anyway, he came up with this idea of like, if you teach everybody to play in all 12 keys from the very beginning, but you teach them to play in all 12 keys, one note at a time, everybody can do it. And he brought at that point cassette tapes. When I heard him speak, he brought cassette tapes of, and I kid you not, a 6th grade oboe player running scales at a pretty quick tempo in all 12 keys. And I'm scratching my head going, no, a 6th grade oboe player can't do this. How did you get this to happen? And so I was intrigued by this process. So I was only about 21 years old at the time, and I was teaching private students. So I decided, you know what, I'm just going to try to do that approach and see what happens. And I'll be darned, it worked. So I just kind of set up like, okay, here's 11 things you can do. And, these are all very basic things. And so what you're doing then is you start with Ionian or major scale. From 1 to 2 is a whole step, from 2 to 3 is a whole step, from 3 to 4 is a half step, etc. And you just do each one of these exercises. And I have people doing them in quarter notes until they get comfortable doing it in all 12 keys. And then you're moving into 8th notes. And you see here, I get all the way up to 7 in the scale. Then I take it up to 8. Actually, what I do is I usually add one down here and take it all the way up. Excuse me. Take it all the way up to 9. I just haven't updated this sheet yet. But for me, I feel it's important to play that scale up to the 9, because so many times when you hear jazz musicians and when people are teaching about jazz, they say, oh, play that 9th. That 9th is a great note. And it is. It's a beautiful, colorful note. So I like to have everybody go up to 9. And actually, you can order these any way you want. You can do anything you want, really. Because one of the things I like to do, especially when I'm working with jazz musicians, whether they're undergrads or whether they're graduate students, and I've done this recently with people as of last semester. Once you get to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in 12 keys, well, let's start playing chords then, because I think that's a good idea. Because most times you'll find that wind players, they're not really thinking about chords. And one of the ways that I do this, I just pick a key here, is after they do this, now, sometimes for people, it's a little bit harder for them to think, oh my gosh, what's that third note? So I tell people on the saxophone, and this would probably work on other instruments too. I said, play the first note, pretend like you're playing the second note, but don't play it. Play the third note, pretend like you're playing the fourth note, don't play it. And then play the fifth note. So I get them to go. Just so they can find them real quick. And so I kind of like them then to play the triad and then get that familiarity with the familiarity with the triad. Once you're there, to play 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then play 1, 3, 5, 3, 1. And the other thing is, this can be really flexible. And it doesn't matter if you're a person who adheres to, and I'm not. I'm a digital person. I'm a numbers person because I like to think about chords and structures and things like that. But if you're a person who adheres to solfeggio and using a do re mi approach, great, fine. I mean, then just tell your students go do re do and do re mi re do. If it helps them, it doesn't matter how they get there. The important thing is they get to the point, first of all, that they can play 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then play 1, 3, 5, 3, 1. And then taking it up to 7, and then taking it up to 9, and doing the chords that go up to 7 in all the majors, and the chords that go up to 9 in all the majors. And then once they've done this, it seems like for my students that I've dealt with over the years, that once they get a hold of this and they start to be able to think in music, is what I call it, you can just drop them into any key and say, play it in A flat, because they can. And so then, you kind of open a door to another way of playing. I don't know physically and electrically what happens in a person's brain when these synapses get fired. But what I've discovered is it's really working for them. And I also tell them, do not practice fast. Not this. This is not about technique. Do not practice this fast. So I say, as you practice, I want you to listen to every note you're playing. Really listen to it. What does it really sound like? And it's something most people are not used to doing when they come to me in higher ed for saxophone kind of lessons. I tend to call them music lessons because it doesn't matter who you send me. I can work with them. And the other thing that I tell people is, do not play fast, because what I want you to do as you're thinking this and conceptualizing it and hearing it, so you're conceptualizing it analytically, and then you're conceptualizing it orally by what it sounds like. I also want you to feel in your hands or hand, depending on your instruments, I want you to feel tactilely, if that's a word, feel what it feels like to have your hands play that stuff. Because these are one of my favorite statements, and it all kind of comes back to the same place for me. My first one is, there's only 12. I tell all my students in all my classes, there's only 12. There's only 12 keys. You can do this. And I'll come back to that. I just lost that train of thought. Sorry. This kind of thing happens to me. I'm not as young as my students anymore. So this is where I like to start. Okay. And I'm sure you can see how that might be valuable. Don't play fast. I want you to know each note, and I want you to be able to think in music. So there's a lot of ways to learn things. One of them is with your eyes. And most of our students these days, they seem to be very visual learners. If you don't write it down for them and show it to them, they're completely lost. Well, I want you to learn a different way. One of my other favorites, now I remember, my other favorite statement is, jazz is an activity that occurs above the neck. The end. Because for me, it's everything that happens in your brain. And so the more areas of your brain you can activate and the more synapses you can fire, the more successful I think you're going to be. And I think every great jazz musician I've ever heard has done this in some ways. I mean, if I go back and I listen to Jelly Roll Morton, because I love Jelly Roll, but if I listen to him play the piano and I go through and I transcribe his arrangements and I go, wow, that guy really knew. He really knew in a lot of different ways. So let yourself learn in different ways so that it comes to you in an analytical, intellectual way, so that you learn with your ears and you learn tactilely by feeling what it feels like. And so all of us come to this with different levels of gifts or talent, as I call it. Some of us are really strong ear learners. Others of us are really strong eye learners. Others of us are strong analytically or what it feels like. And that all those things are great. I'm not saying one thing is better than the other. What I'm saying is different people have different levels of each of these. So I've spent the last 40 years of my life trying to even out all of those things, so that if I have to ear something and hear it and learn it, I can do it. If I need to think of it and learn it that way, I can learn it. So I like to have all of the options available for learning for myself, and I like to make them available to my students as well. Okay. No, that didn't work. Okay. 1 second, please. Just have to close that one. Okay, on the file, I call this Kent Scales and Chords. It's been called that for 20 years just because I needed a good way to find it. Anyway, once my students have learned to think in music, then I want them to start to do things that have to do with permutations. I'm a big studier. I study music. I listen to music all the time, every single day. And I don't get to practice the saxophone every day, but I'm doing something in music every single day, Saturdays and Sundays included. And one of my great inspirations of my life is John Coltrane, because he was like a maniacal practicer. He was trying to learn everything he could learn, as if he knew his time on the planet was not going to be very long. So permutations are something that's really important to me in my practice. And I think it's important for students too. And without going into huge details about all of my whole permutations thing, yeah, if we only practice scales going up, then we're only going to play scales going up. If we only practice chords going up, we're only going to be able to play chords going up. The things you practice are the things you'll be able to play. And the ways in which you practice them are the ways in which you'll be able to play them. So that being said, one of the ways that I like to start with students after they've done, the basics of major scale, what I call dominant scale or Mixolydian with a lowered 7, and Dorian with a lowered 7 and 3, then I like to get them into this exercise that I stole out of the front of one of Jamie Aebersold's play-along books. It's probably in most of them. And what it is just a combination. So I let you look at notes for the first time. just so that you can see the shapes and how they work. So I call this one scale up, scale down. And I call part 2 scale up, chord down. You go up the scale, you come down the chord. Then I flip it around. Oh, go up the chord, come down the scale. Then you can go up the chord, down the chord. What I've found in recent years is that it's usually, on a weekly basis, and this can occur at any speed, depending on how many people you're working with, what type of people you're working with, what their experiences are. Recently, I've started to discover the student has more success if they start with part 1 and just do scale up, scale down through all the keys. And that's kind of like a way that I hook it on to what we just did, because they've really already done this. And I point that out to them. And I say, look, you've already done this. Part 4, chord up, chord down. But they've done them as singular exercises. So I say, okay, I want you to go through and I want you to play scale up, scale down, chord up, chord down. And again, I don't like people to do it fast. They can practice technique books to learn to play fast. But, and there's a statement that I heard that Joe Lovano made to one of his students one time. I was talking, this student was a friend of mine. And Joe said to the student, no, he says, I want you to be with your notes. And that really stuck with me. So I want everybody to be able to be with each note they play at this point in their development. So then we're to the point that we go through, pick another key. Okay. So we're playing. And it's a really nice feeling thing, and they can feel good about, okay, I kind of know these two things already, so now I'm going to paste them together into this. After they've done that, I found that this is part 2 and part 3. That's why I started putting part 4 up there with part 1. 2 and 3 seem to present more challenges for students, because, and this is where I come to the thing of, well, if you don't practice it, you can't play it. So yeah, they're really good in part 2, going up the scale. I'm pointing at my screen, sorry. They're really good at playing up the scale. They get to the 9th note and they're supposed to play the chord coming down. They can't think of the chord sometimes. I said, no. Then you have to practice slower and think ahead of time that you're going to come down the chord in that key. Because if you can't think it and you can't hear it, I'm not sure how you're going to play it. Same thing here. In part 3, they'll go up that chord and they'll be, oh, what scale am I coming down? Because you have to play the scale. I tell them, you have to learn the scale upside down too. If you don't know the C scale upside down, then you don't know the C scale. Sorry. So,
sorry.
Sorry.
Hey, Ken, can I ask you a question here?
Absolutely. Yeah, sure.
I'm
sorry,
sure
I get on a roll.
No, it's cool. I'm sure you're going to get to this later, but did you ever, when you're working on the super Locrian or the whatever it is mode, melodic minor, do you ever put the chord symbols above these patterns?
Well, this is the only thing anyone ever gets, including me, this page.
Yeah.
Because I add that later.
Okay. I figured you did, but I think it would be useful when the students are practicing, right, to be able to say, okay, I'm playing melodic minor over this arpeggio. What chord is that? And I think them do it in all 12 keys, as you said, but
I think as I'm teaching it and discussing it and talking to them about the structure of it, let's say melodic minor. I always tell people, I want to know the fastest way to do something. I want the fastest derivation possible. So I say, well, look, just play a major scale with a lowered third and you have melodic minor. Now, because I'm sure you noticed up here, I do them in this order: Ionian, Mixolydian, Dorian. Then, and this comes a bit later, but melodic minor ascending, Locrian sharp 2, and super Locrian, or altered scale, as some people call it.
Mm-hmm.
As I'm introducing these things to them, what I do is I say, Ionian, oh, it's major. So, and then I'll write down on their page, I'll say, yeah, because you could see C major 7, or you could see C major 9, or you could see, you could see C major 6, or you could see C major 6/9. So that that's a great point, because as I do that, as they're practicing it, they're thinking in chord changes.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're already thinking in that cycle.
Right.
So I do show them, if they're doing Mixolydian, I go, look, it can say 7, it can say 9, it can say 13. It is all those things. And Dorian, it can be minor 7 or minor 9 or minor 11 or minor 13. It's this. And these are all just basic kind of sound ideas. Same thing with melodic minor, Locrian sharp 2, super Locrian. And I make suggestions up here about how to do this. Because actually I had this sheet before I made the first one years ago. I like people to practice with the metronome on 2 and 4.
Mm-hmm.
Because if a student can't do that yet, then I like it on all 4 beats. Personally, I don't like it on 1 and 3 because it puts the emphasis on the wrong syllable.
Yeah.
And I like 2 and 4 because you really have to keep yourself centered in your own sense of pulse and rhythm and whatever subdivision you're dealing with. Now, these things can be played, and I say subdivision, these things can be played all slurred, they can be played all tongue, they can be played swinging, they can be played straight 8 notes. It doesn't matter. My thinking is, wow, just learn it and be with your notes. I make this suggested articulation because for me, that's the way I heard Charlie Parker play. And that's the way I heard Sonny Rollins play. And that's the way I've heard so many people play. And most of our students, they're not used to articulating on the upbeats. And I'm not as concerned these days. I don't think about as much, oh, I want you to subdivide it into triplets, or I want you to subdivide it into this and that. No, I'm more concerned with how you, and I've changed my language about this, about how you enunciate or speak your notes. I don't like the word articulate anymore because there seems to be a different connection for students about that. It doesn't work for them. I say, no, man, it's got to be legato. I want you to play everything smooth, but tongue. Enunciate, because then if I use the word enunciate, it's better than articulate, because I don't want the notes to sound ta 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 ta. I want the notes to be the way that we hear people play. So I use a different kind of language analogy about that. I have a couple of different exercises because most of my students, when I get to melodic minor ascending, they'll kind of be able to figure out 1 or 2 keys of that maybe, but then, they've never really learned that minor in lessons or to a great extent in music theory. It seems like in lots of saxophone lessons, teachers teach harmonic minor to the exclusion of other minors. And as we all know, there's lots of different minor scales. There's lots of majors too, but when I get them doing melodic minor, I use this derivation exercise with them. And I point out that, look, once we get the melodic minors learned, I go back up to music theory class in your freshman year and tell me what's the relative minor of C. And they answer that pretty quickly. Oh, A minor. Yeah, because it's built on the 6th scale degree. I said, okay, good. Now, I say, what's the relative minor of A melodic minor? And their heads spin around a little bit. And I go, well, wait a minute. Just go down to the 6th scale degree. So I'll do A melodic minor, just because we're there. And so I teach them this derivation exercise where you play the scale like that, and then play in half notes and go down to the 7th of melodic minor, below where you started, then go to the 6th. And when you go to the 6th, just play that melodic minor starting on the 6th degree, and it gives you Locrian sharp 2. So you get and so for a lot of them, I like to take this intermediary step because it helps them with harmonic relationships, but it also helps them find that Locrian sharp 2 in a much quicker way. I didn't used to do that at all, but I do it now. So, and I do it the same way with the super Locrian. I say, okay, play your, your C melodic minor, and then bump down to the 7th note, and then play that. And they do it. Now, here's the one place where there's where I add something else that I didn't write down. I teach it in the room. So if we're doing this and we're playing C melodic minor, I say, okay, now play it, bump down to the 7 and play that. They do that. And I go, sounds weird, doesn't it? And they go, yeah. I said, well, play that scale and add one more note to it. And I go, I said, take the note. And then usually I go through and I analyze each note for them, or I make them do it. I say, how does it relate to the root if that's B and it's dominant? So they go, okay, for flat 9, and what's the D? So most of them will say 3rd. I go, no, it's dominant. I go, it's sharp 9. Now you get to D sharp. Now here's your 3rd. You guys can go through and do that analysis. So I like to take the super Locrian scale all the way up to the sharp 9. So I have an extra note in there. So I always just play a triplet on what I think of as beat 4. Because then it works out and your ear starts to hear that sharp 9 against the 3rd in the other octave, especially when you arpeggiate the chord. And I don't even use the flat 9 when we do the arpeggios with these. I tell them what I want you to do. Well, just like the sheet said, I want you to make the chord 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. I said, so you got to go 1. You have the major 3rd. You have the raised 5th. Then you have the lowered 7th right next to it. It's a whole step above it. And then you got to go to the sharp 9. It's a 4th, a perfect 4th above that. And it takes people a little while to get used to this. It took me a little while to get used to it. So you go. And they get that sound so that they're going. And you really start to have that sound of that dominant altered scale or the super Locrian or the diminished whole tone. It doesn't matter what you call it. You need to learn that sound in your ear. You need to have some kind of analytical knowledge of what's going on with it. and how to use it. Because I tell people, man, when you see sharp 9, sharp 5, you have to have a sound. If you don't have a sound that you can apply, and I'm not even talking about having appropriate kinds of musical language and ideas yet. I'm just talking about having a sound right now. Mm-hmm. So I take them through all that. Now, usually before I teach any of the melodic minor stuff, there are two other things that I like to use with people. And this kind of goes to what Harold was talking about, which is a great little segue and follow-up. I like people to learn major pentatonic and minor pentatonic and do it the same way through the cycle, and just do them in one octave kinds of exercises like this. After they do one octave, then I like my saxophonists to do it the whole range of the instrument. You know, man, just play C major pentatonic from low C all the way up to high E and all the way back down to low C. You know, play it everywhere all over your horn. Because you're not just going to play in a one octave range for the rest of your life, but that's a good way to learn it. And I also make the connection of, okay, you know, the digital pattern of 1, 2, 3, 5, 6 for major pentatonic, for minor pentatonic, 1 flat 3, 4, 5 flat 7. But then after they've learned it, you know, each one individually, I go, did you notice anything? I go, watch this, you know, play C major. I go, now play your relative minor of that scale. So the relative minor, which they remember is A, I go, start your major pentatonic on A. They play it. And I ask them, what's it sound like now? They go, that's minor pentatonic. I go, yeah, it's the same derivation. So once they do that, then I go back and I introduce to them this, what I call major blues scale. I get the name out of some book. It doesn't mean anything. We can call it anything we want. I like to call it Lester's sound. One of his sounds anyway. I said, take your major pentatonic, and after you play 2, go half step up to 3. Make a passing tone. So you go 1, 2, flat 3, 3, 5, 6, 1. And I do the same thing with the minor blues scale. Okay, take all your minor pentatonics, and what I want you to do is put the half step between 4 and 5 in the digits. And then I point out to them, well, you know, one is derived from the other two, just as in major pentatonics. If C major pentatonic is A minor pentatonic, then C major blues scale is actually A minor blues scale. And I tell them, it's a good price that way. You get 2 for the price of 1. You know, it's buy one, get one free here with Kent. So, but I like them to do these too, because, you know, as we know, this is pentatonic scales are a sound that we hear everywhere in American music. Pentatonics are a sound that we hear in almost every single musical culture in the world. You know, if you go to Asia, you're going to hear it. If you go to folk music in Europe, you're going to hear it. You know, in almost every group of people that makes music in the world, which is basically all of them, almost all of them, that sound is in their music. There's something really natural. And I haven't really investigated it. I've read some things about why people gravitate towards this sound. Well, because we know, boy, Coltrane, man, that sound is in his playing through his whole career. Why is that something we relate to? Why are those sounds things that are in all like folk music in America? Why are those things in country western music? Why is it in rhythm and blues? Especially then when you start talking about the blues scales. Why? There's something magical about that sound. And an ethnomusicologist that's a much deeper thinker and has a lot more time on their hands than I do, hopefully will write a really good book about and come up with a really good theory about why pentatonics and blues scales are something that happens. I think the pentatonic thing, I heard one theory of it because it all has to do with the interval structure, and there's only threes and there's only twos, but I don't want to spend our time talking all about that. Okay. The other thing, and I'm rolling fast here, trying to get as many things in as I can. I had a great teacher that Glenn had also. His name was Joe Lipinski. And one of the things he always did, he was a studio teacher, he flooded us with so much work that it was impossible for us to ever complete it during our time in lessons. I used to ask him, I said, Joe, why do you keep like just adding to things when I can barely keep up with this stuff? And he says, I just want you to have an awareness that it's there. And I want you to know that there's more work to do. And sometime during your life, hopefully you'll get back to it and finish it. And I think that's a great way to think about it. So I like to flood people with information. And then when they have questions, we talk about it. I email my students all the time and text them, and they're always like, I need you to explain that to me again. Fine. It's easy. All right. And this relates to my thing of, man, we need to practice going down scales too. And these are scales that we hear. Once, I think the clearest indication of them that we find is in early bebop music, and the music that Charlie Parker plays actually before we call it bebop. A lot of the solos that he played with Jay McShann's orchestra. And I have all the transcriptions of those. My books are pretty expensive. So if you want a particular one, just get in touch with me and I'll send it to you. That's been a big area of my study. This first one is dominant bebop. And basically what it is you put a different kind of passing tone in these scales. And it's a C major scale, except now we're going to slip in a lowered 7 also, so that we have the natural 7 from the major scale, and we have the lowered 7 from the Mixolydian scale. And the great thing about this is, and this helps for students with hearing the sound of dominant chords too, because on the downbeats, you're going to hear root 7, 5, 3, 1. So you're actually arpeggiating the chord in a linear manner, which is really nice. So I came up with just this little exercise that I ask people to do. I said, okay, start it on 3 and play it, because it doesn't always start on 1. What if you're improvising and you're up near 3 and you're trying to get to 3 and sound good? Well, yeah, you should be able to do it on 3. You should be able to do it on 5. You should be able to do it on 7. And I'll bet if you listen to enough music, you'd find examples of all of those. So again, I tell everybody, cycle them. You learn them in 12 keys from the very beginning. Now, when I was younger, I didn't practice this other version. I call this major bebop. I think I actually played it, but I never practiced it. So I started coming up with different ways to practice things. And I said, boy, that's good for students too. It's a good way to learn. So I tell them, take a major scale and now put your passing tone between 6 and 5. So we have a descending scale that comes down, root, it's major, root, 7, 6, flat 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then practice descending those on root, 3rd, 5th, and 6. On the top of this one, I use 6, and then it resolves really nicely to the root here with good voice leading. So that's how I kind of get people to start thinking in music. And the more and more I keep formulating these ideas about how to do this, I get better at this every year. And because I'm wacky, I walk around thinking about it. And I just kind of come up with ideas like this about how I'm practicing. And I say, well, maybe my students should be doing that too. Because they're not big secrets or anything. I feel like my job with most of them is to demystify all of this stuff. I don't know. I just try to keep getting better at it. Oh, I'll just point out too, I started practicing this major bebop, when I was writing my dissertation on Charlie Parker's solos with Jay McShann's orchestra. And man, I'm telling you, Bird is playing that. That sound is in several of his solos. He knew about that sound somehow. I'm not sure exactly where he knew about it, perhaps from Lester, but I haven't been able to make a direct connection with that. Anyway, I'm happy to entertain any kind of questions.
I have a question.
Yeah, my thing is, man, let's just make people learn things.
When you first start teaching changes, then maybe you could skip real quickly to that. How do you teach people to read changes and solo over chord changes?
Well, I think it's kind of concurrent with doing this kind of stuff. These are things actually that I do in the studio, but I've also done these in classes of people too. Reading changes. Well, the first okay, I know, I got there. I just have to reconnect. So if I'm playing if we're doing, let's say, we're doing a blues in B flat, because I like to kind of teach from a holistic approach, but with all the details too. Say, okay, if we don't have a rhythm section, then I just play the piano with them. If we don't have a bass player, I play the bass line too, because I want them to hear, feel, and know that form of the blues, and be able to think within the form. So the first thing I have people do on a given set of chord changes is to just play whole notes. I give them the chord changes. I say, we'll do a real basic one. So it's about this tempo. 1, 2, 3. Kind of the simplest 12-bar version of 1-4-5 blues. So then I tell them, okay, now you have to do your 1, 2, 3s on the chord changes. And so if some of the people are practicing this stuff that they've done with me already, this is a pretty simple process. I go, yeah, you just play, when your chord symbol is G dominant, you play 1, 2, 3 in G dominant. Basically we go through and we go. And then I tell them, look, when you play 1, 2, 3s and the blues go to the 4 chord, your voice leading is perfect because you have B going to C. And whether or not that sticks or not, I'm not as concerned about it as much as I am just an awareness, because I talk a lot about voice leading later. Then I have them do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5s, and they have to do these in 8 notes. And, you're only a couple of places away from then they hear that temporary modulation. Or when you're on the 5 chord, now you can also take this idea, with my idea of permutations, play it upside down. You don't end up in the right place, but it doesn't hurt to play things upside down. Then I take them all the way up to 7. Oh, before I do that, I say, okay, now we're going to play all the triads of the blues. And, this can happen in a day or two. But what I keep doing is every day I walk into class, I sit down at the piano, I go, here we go. I want to hear roots, 1, 2, 3s, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5s, 1, 3, 5, 3, 1s. Here we go, everybody. And everybody plays it with me as I play it. Because I think drilling them with these ideas is crucial. I learned that from Tony. You got to drill them. It's one of the things he told me when I first started teaching. You got to drill these people. You got to drill them. They have to do it over and over and over. It's calisthenics every day before you take the field to play second base. If you don't stretch before you go out, you're going to hurt yourself. So I like to think of these as our calisthenics, our exercises, our warm-ups, whatever you want to call them. So then I build this thing. I go roots, 1, 2, 3s, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5s, 1, 3, 5, 3, 1s, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 3, 5, 7s, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9s. And you can do whatever you want with them. And you can do them as complex or as simple with the chord changes as you want. So if you're doing it with junior high kids, maybe they learn that, doing it up to the 5s and doing triads. And, maybe you can teach them, a little bit of like that pentatonic stuff. And then maybe some of the blues scales. And they're going to start to think, oh, major scale, major pentatonic, major blues scale. But I can also use that minor blues scale too, because you teach them that a little bit. The mistake that I think we've been making for so many years when we teach this is we think blues scale is that minor blues scale, and that's the only one you can play. There's a lot more sounds than that out there. And I think we do ourselves a disservice when we only say, this is the sound I want you to play on the blues. Well, that's an exercise. Teach kids major scales, teach them triads, teach them dominant scales, teach them all this stuff, and let them pick what sounds good. And say, here are your options for today, or for this week, or for this song. Okay, let it rip. So I tend to take a building block kind of approach with this, but also a very holistic view at the same time. Does that make sense, Glenn?
Yeah.
Okay.
Who's got another question for Kent? Harold? Eric? Go ahead, Eric.
I have a question. At what point do you see, I guess, improvisational freedom in your teaching sequence?
From the very beginning. From the very first note.
Well, let me attempt to modify.
Okay.
At a certain level of mastery, if you will.
I have a really good nuts and bolts approach to all of this stuff. I think that works for my group of students.
Mm-hmm.
I hear what you're getting at. The thing that all of us need to remember is, at some point, man, just the sound and the rhythms and all that's, that solo that the guy played was what made us want to do this. So I don't think, and I like to do this with students, I create things on iReal Pro for them because lots of them have that program because I didn't have it, but I got it last year because they all use it. And I'll make vamps for them. Major key vamps, minor key vamps, dominant vamps, because you can make a 4-bar vamp and have it repeat like a whole bunch of times. And what I like them to do, as soon as they learn some notes and some chords and some structures, whatever those are, even if you can just do 1, 2, 3, great. Now, improvise with that. Well, that doesn't mean you have to stay in one octave. This is the other thing. If if you cut them loose and let them be creative, don't restrict them. That's the worst thing we do, is pull all the creativity out of people as we teach them about music. You know, because why can't you go, if you're playing in G dominant, they can play whatever they want. Why not? You don't have to keep it in the same octave. Maybe they go, man, I like it when I can jump around on the saxophone and do weird things. Okay, play like that. You know, I've taken to this newer approach that I never tell people that there's any such thing as a wrong note. No, what do you hear? You know, from early on, I think we can't crush them, because as soon as you crush them and put restrictions on them, they don't want to do it anymore. But you just keep, going, okay, going through your maintenance is what I call it, going through your maintenance, and hey, let's try this, and have it be a game too. Make up a game every week of like, okay, today this is what we're going to do. Here's the game. The game is you can use these notes, and you can play whatever you want. Or maybe the game is a rhythm game. You can play this rhythm. I want everybody to play this rhythm and put whatever notes you want in it. It doesn't even have to be over the chord changes. Play the rhythm and groove against a drum set player or a metronome or whatever. Just be free. We need to take advantage of the fact that they'll come up with their own weird ways of doing things, and it's great, because then we don't wash the creativity away.
Did you have a question, Harold? You're muted.
Okay, so
There you go.
yeah, Ken, I think it's really important. I had you on the audio the whole time I was walking around my place, and you have to get a kind of a practice regimen. And for me, I call it on piano, like with these scales and whatever, you're carpeting a place, So you have your carpet down, and then you can choose, and depending on how your chops are, if you can cover the whole area, great. But if you have a few notes, but if you don't know what the possibilities are, then you don't have those choices. And so, once it's carpeted, I like to always think of all those harmonic things, starting with triads and seventh chords, triads and inversions, on all those kind of things. So even if you have a major scale, you got, and we have them. So you have all these possibilities that are in Bach's music and anything. And the more you get to it, I'm not the most diligent myself, but like you mentioned too, like maybe you'll get around to it, and it's just like, oh yeah, boy, A flat harmonic minor. Can I do the triads and second inversion up this? Well, that happened in the Bach A flat, it might have happened there. And so sometimes if a student is really doing that and they say, wow, yeah, I'm not telling a lie. I found that in this little Bach thing where, yeah, he knew what those things were. And the thing is that there's a harmonic, the scale, the piano players are always concerned a lot with, chords. What are your progressions, whatever. And I said, I'm still a scale guy. And to me, the chords develop out of scales. And so I get my scales carpeted, and then I see what I can, can I play ninth chords up the scale? Can I do all this stuff? And the answer is not in every key today.
No.
If I have some time to practice, maybe I can get some of it. But for my own thing, there was a 20th Century Harmony book, Vincent Persichetti, 20th Century Harmony. It was very, very popular when I was in school. And Persichetti on page 44, I know this. He talks about, not in these are my terms, like the environment of the scale, or what's there in the scale, and what can you derive out of that? What harmonies derive out of these? It's just a page of scales, kind of. And yeah, there's some strange one there. And then do harmonies arrive from that? Or do you get, like in India, it's not about harmony, it's about a drone. And then you play these things. So if you're trying to do Indian music with harmonies, you're kind of a jerk. But but to try to find those things within what I'm still thinking of as scale. So I really appreciate what you're talking about.
Well, it's scales are one of the early things that we talk to students about.
Yeah.
Even when you're taking little private lessons when they're 5th and 6th grade. And I ask my students, when they come to college, I say, well, what came first, the chicken or the egg? So if you study music history, and we all did, and I'm like some weirdo, I continue to, what came first, scales or chords? Well, we all know scales came first. If you go all the way back to the Middle Ages and Renaissance, it was that, that strange kind of modal thing. And whatever ended up being a harmony was by happenstance. It wasn't until the Baroque that we said, oh, this is harmony and this is how it works. So I think it's natural and human for us to start with scales. That's my ethnomusicological head. Because as you say, other cultures in the world, they don't even think about chords. Some of the ancient cultures in the world, they don't even know what chords were. And if you're playing that traditional music in a traditional way, they don't care about chords. Even in African music, in many of the cultures, there's no chords. There's a thing as thirds in certain parts of Nigeria where one person sings this, the other person sings in thirds underneath them.
Yeah.
And that's what they do.
Perfect fourths sometimes,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's, it's beautiful when you hear those voices that can sing that, ethnic music of the different groups of Nigeria or Ghana or, any of those kinds of countries on the west coast of Africa. And it's interesting that those were the peoples those ethnic groups were the peoples that were brought here to the United States against their will. And I think about those kinds of things a lot because I had an instructor, a professor who I had for classes, and he also was on my thesis and dissertation. His name was Akin Yuba. And he was actually, his father was Ghanaian, but he was born in Nigeria and educated in the United Kingdom at the conservatories there. And he was by training an organist. But he actually kind of ended up being a composer, ethnomusicologist, and a brilliant mind. And he had such insight about those musics from certain ethnic groups, especially in Nigeria and Ghana. And I kind of noticed the parallels to African-American music that both preceded jazz and music that we find in jazz. A lot of those practices and preferences are there. So I tend to think either those practices may have retained in the United States, or they're just human and we all have them. I don't know. I mean, I haven't come to a clear conclusion on any of that yet.
We got a couple more minutes. Does anybody else have go ahead, Harold.
Well, no, the only thing I was going to say is, like, back to the, the rhythmic thing of finding some rhythms that you like and then playing these things, and not just playing them as scales, but finding a rhythm that works for you. And then that gives it a personality beyond just whatever the content is.
That leads right into our next session on rhythm.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And also for any kind of rehearsals, I included it. Glenn passed it out. There's a whole thing that I developed based on some drum books and my friend Glenn Shaft helping me do rhythm permutations. that you can use with individuals for learning to read rhythms that we typically find in arrangements and things. Or you can use them I've used them in a big band where I go, okay, we're going to do this today. And the drummer starts playing it and the drummer catches the figures. And I tell the people, just play whatever note you want. Just play the rhythm and play it really together and really tight. And so they're not thinking about notes. They're thinking about the rhythm, which I don't think we do a good enough job with either. Okay, I got out of the way. But there's
Go
a whole
ahead, Eric.
packet of those.
Did you have a question, Eric?
Yeah, I was interested in like some of the scale development that was spoke about amounts to quote unquote jazz language, but I'm also concerned with understanding where the bridge from just scales to what people call jazz language, actually lines and stuff that people are playing. Is there a part of the teaching development sequence that goes from scales to jazz language or scales to
Well, for,
um,
for, for me and my students, I think it's kind of a simultaneous procedure. I like to
okay.
think of it this way. Um, while they're doing that, I like to have them, begin. The first thing I tell people in the very first lesson with me is, don't bring me books. All I want you to do is bring me something that you like to listen to. If it's jazz, great. If it's not, great. I don't care. Show me what you like. And then I start from there. I said, look, your person does this. We're going to learn this. Your person does this. We're going to learn this. But it's very soon thereafter that I say, okay, I want you to start transcribing. Pick something. Don't care what it is. I had one young lady one year. She brought me like this. She goes, "Oh, Kent, you're going to hate this." I said, "No, I'm not." She brought me this Eddie Harris recording that had like synthesizer, and Eddie's like playing on top of it. He sounds beautiful. And it had voices underneath, and it almost had like kind of a Nigerian kind of vibe to it. And it was funky, man. But Eddie played so beautifully on it. She goes, "Oh, Kent, I don't think you're going to like it." She played it for me. I said, "Play it again." I had to listen to it like 3 times. It was so captivating. I said, "You got to figure that out. It's making me crazy. Transcribe it. What is it?" And then I made her transcribe the voice parts and the synth parts. And then, so she was doing all of it at the same time. And then I got her improvising over Eddie's recording with him. And then I told her later on, I said, "Why don't you take all those ideas and write them out for like 5 saxophones?" I said, "And make something for your recital where you're going to play a solo on it." And she did it. And it was just spectacular. And all the way from, here's her senior recital with this funky 5 saxophone band, grooving like crazy, and she's blowing on top of it, sounding like Eddie Harris. And it came from her just saying, "Oh, Kent, you're going to hate this." It's like, "No, I don't hate it." I said, "I love it because you love it. It's just music." So, let them bring you what they like, and then start